From the shattered observation posts drifting in low orbit, we watched, calculating trajectories and predicting outcomes. The target was insignificant by every measure, an orphanage, a cluster of weak structures clinging to the crust of a blue-green world. Our instruments recorded the launch of our precision projectile, and all protocols anticipated a swift obliteration. But as the shells struck, igniting the walls in violent cascades of fire and ash, what unfolded surpassed every simulation, every data point, every hypothesis our intelligence could muster. Children darted through collapsing corridors, their limbs lithe and instinctively coordinated. They slipped through smoke-choked hallways with a precision that mocked the laws of fragility. Some carried the youngest, others guided those who had stumbled. Adults, those humans we assumed would crumble under pain, surged forward with fury-shaped determination. Faces etched with grief and rage, they lifted beams, dragged debris, and created barriers with a speed and ingenuity that defied physics. In moments, chaos became choreography. Rubble became cover, walls became shields, makeshift weapons sprang from shattered furniture. From our vantage, the scene was a revelation. A species so seemingly primitive had orchestrated an adaptive counter-response faster than our autonomous units could predict. Their movements were improvisational yet cohesive, a network of instinctual strategy that bent the very rules of engagement. Desperation became audacity, fear became tactical acumen. Every human present was not merely surviving. Each was a node in an emergent system of resistance that challenged the very precepts of our military calculus. Flashes of fire illuminated faces set with unyielding resolve. Their eyes burned not with panic, but with something we had never catalogued, a weaponized hope, a defiance that transformed vulnerability into strength. For the first time, a species made endurance an offensive tool, using unity as a form of violence. Smoke and ruin painted the sky crimson, yet the humans pressed on, undeterred, improvising, adapting. Our sensors strained to comprehend. Data feeds stuttered under the unpredictability of their reactions. Every assumption about weakness, about compliance, about mortality itself was shattered. And then, as if the world itself held its breath, we realized the destruction we had intended as an end was merely the beginning. This species, this fragile, audacious human race, had not been broken. It had been awakened. And what we were witnessing was not the aftermath of attack. It was the genesis of a total war that would ripple across the cosmos. A firestorm ignited not by technology, but by an unquenchable will. Above the orphanage, the sky burned. Below, the humans rose. The first salvo of our precision war had revealed an intelligence we had never expected.
And in that revelation lay a terrifying truth. The war had already begun, and we were not the ones holding the advantage. Across the void, the whispers began. At first, subtle, scattered through fragmented transmissions and intercepted subspace signals, tales of a species that should have been inconsequential, yet performed feats that defied every calculation. They called them humans, fragile, ephemeral creatures, and yet unstoppable. Reports crossed our databases, each more incredulous than the last. Observers who had catalogued billions of civilizations paused to question their own sensors. Could a species so limited in physique harbor such boundless will? We observed from afar, through orbiting drones, through silent spectroscopic scans, children lifting debris that should have crushed them, moving with a precision no juvenile organism could be expected to achieve, elders directing small-scale skirmishes with ruthless clarity, improvising strategies with a logic that seemed almost alien to our analytical paradigms, ordinary civilians wielding improvised weapons, adapting to destruction faster than any environmental pressure should permit. Each encounter dismantled our doctrines one by one. Every tactical simulation, every model of predictability failed. And yet, it was not just their physical response, it was their unity. Observing them, we sensed a cohesion that seemed instinctual, almost evolutionary. One human falls, another rises, not merely in mourning, but with immediate strategic purpose. Systems emerge from chaos, plans forming in real time, fluid and adaptive. Their cooperation transcends mere social constructs. It is as if some internal code, some unseen algorithm embedded in their very DNA, drives them to shield one another, to improvise survival as both offense and defense. From our alien vantage, it was mesmerizing. Myths we had once dismissed as folklore now walked, ran, and fought before our eyes. Legends whispered among star systems became tangible reality. And with each observation, we felt a creeping dread. The humans were learning, evolving, and spreading, not in number alone, but in ingenuity and audacity. The cosmos had never witnessed a species like this, and in our awe, we realized that Earth's defiance was no isolated spark. It was the first flame of a conflagration that could consume all expectations. The first descent was cautious. Our scouts, sleek and silent, slipped through the stratosphere of this insignificant blue-green planet, anticipating minimal resistance, expecting compliant flight or predictable panic. Protocol dictated ease, efficiency, and precision. But as our units touched down on the outskirts of a human settlement, the anticipated silence shattered. From the vantage of orbit, we had seen their resilience, an abstract concept, but up close it became physical, visceral. Humans emerged from their shelters not with trembling fear, but with deliberate calculation.
Children guided the wounded through rubble-strewn streets. Elders positioned themselves at strategic intersections, their eyes scanning and coordinating in a manner that defied simple instinct. Civilians, armed with improvised tools, converted debris into weapons, barricades, and traps with uncanny ingenuity. Our AI systems, designed to anticipate threat patterns and predict outcomes, faltered. Each movement was an anomaly, each response a variable beyond our calculations. We anticipated chaos, we received orchestration. Humans did not flee, they analyzed. They did not submit, they engaged. One scout approached a collapsed building where several humans had gathered. Protocol assumed surrender or panic. Instead, the humans executed a series of defensive maneuvers so precise that our sensors registered them almost as a single entity. A child ducked beneath a broken wall, pulling an elder to cover, while another set a makeshift tripwire from splintered beams. A civilian, an old woman with trembling hands, hurled a projectile with pinpoint accuracy, disabling our reconnaissance drone before it could even register a threat. We recorded the moment with a mixture of fascination and alarm. Even minor skirmishes became lessons in unpredictability. A patrol unit attempting to secure a supply depot found themselves navigating an environment we had assumed hostile, yet the humans had transformed it into a maze of traps, decoys, and tactical advantage. Each ambush was improvisational yet coordinated, guided not by strict hierarchy but by instinctual understanding of survival, protection, and strategy. Their responses were neither random nor rote, they were moral as much as tactical. One human risked her life to save a younger companion in the crossfire, improvising a shield from debris while simultaneously countering our strikes. Our sensors could quantify the movement, but not the purpose, the emotional drive that informed every calculated risk. From our perspective, it was paradoxical. These beings were simultaneously fragile and unstoppable. Their bodies were vulnerable to injury, their numbers small, their technology inferior, and yet their will was infinite. In every interaction, they combined intuition, empathy, and tactical brilliance, creating a force field of human determination around even the weakest among them. Each unit we engaged with left a signature of awe on our observational data, resilience measured in minutes and seconds, courage quantified in unpredictable leaps of ingenuity, and a moral intelligence we had not considered. The environment itself seemed to bend under their influence. Streets were no longer inert pathways but conduits of resistance. Ruins became weapons, fire became a tool, smoke became a cloak. Even our drones, designed for omnipresent observation, found themselves outmaneuvered by instinct and improvisation.
Humans used one another as nodes in a living network, a fluid system of offense and defense, each aware not just of their own survival, but of the survival of their companions. They learned faster than we could anticipate, adapting to every threat in real time, predicting countermeasures we had not even conceived. It was here, at first contact, that we began to question the very fundamentals of intelligence and warfare. No model, no doctrine, no simulation had accounted for this combination of vulnerability, ingenuity, and moral calculation. Each human was a paradox, at once mortal and seemingly eternal, weak yet unbreakable in spirit. To touch them, to engage with them, was to confront a logic that transcended calculation. We, observers of thousands of civilizations, realized we had underestimated not just their capacity to fight, but their capacity to redefine the meaning of conflict itself. The first exchange of fire was minor, almost incidental. Yet even in this moment, we sensed the enormity of what we had begun. Humans did not merely repel, they challenged, tested, and learned. With each countermeasure, we recorded not just tactics, but intent, determination, and an unyielding will that no force we wielded could suppress. And as our units retreated to reassess, a chilling truth emerged. In underestimating them, we had ignited a series of encounters that would forever alter the calculus of the galaxy.
The humans stood among the wreckage, bloodied, exhausted, yet upright. Their eyes met the sky, and we, watching through our instruments, understood with dawning terror and awe. They had not been waiting for us, they had been waiting for something greater than mere survival. And what we had triggered with our arrival was not a battle, but the beginning of an escalation that could consume worlds. Navarra should have been hours within hours. Every simulation, every tactical model predicted swift suppression. Our assault teams, armed with overwhelming firepower, approached the city with the confidence of inevitability. From orbit, we observed the sprawling metropolis, its streets narrow, its buildings aged but numerous, and we calculated the cost of resistance as negligible. Yet the moment our forces breached the perimeter, it became clear that the predictions had been catastrophically wrong. The humans did not flee, they did not submit, they transformed. Barricades sprang from rubble, walls of debris and twisted metal erected with astonishing speed. Civilians, men, women, even children, worked alongside trained soldiers, improvising weapons from fragments of our own machinery. Drones designed for surveillance and suppression were intercepted mid-flight, reprogrammed, and returned to sow confusion among our ranks. A single squad of humans, armed only with scavenged parts, created a trap that disabled one of our assault units entirely, their movements precise and coordinated as though guided by an unseen intelligence.
We documented their actions, but comprehension lagged behind observation. Every tactic, every maneuver, every act of bravery, often suicidal, was executed with a clarity that defied expectation. Humans displayed a systemic intelligence, not just an individual courage. One family, trapped in the ruins of a collapsed apartment, used the rubble to create a choke point, funneling our units into predictable paths, then ambushing them with improvised projectiles. Another group rigged an abandoned transport with incendiary devices, forcing a retreat where our algorithms had expected dominance. Their defiance was not haphazard, it was evolution in action. Even as fire and smoke painted the city in shades of blood and shadow, human squads adapted faster than our recalculations could process. They communicated silently, almost instinctively, through gestures, glances, and subtle signals imperceptible to our surveillance systems. One squad, appearing cornered, feigned retreat only to emerge from a side alley, striking a flanking unit that had assumed victory. Every encounter became a lesson in improvisation, each death and injury leveraged to strengthen the overall defense. From our vantage, we began to recognize patterns. Humans converted suffering into strategy, loss became opportunity, desperation became ingenuity. We observed a mother shielding children with her body while simultaneously directing a counteroffensive. An elderly man, barely able to stand, guided younger soldiers to positions of advantage, predicting enemy movement with a precision that seemed preternatural. The city itself became a living entity under their command, each street and alley a node in a sprawling, adaptive network of resistance. As the siege progressed, our forces became trapped in cycles of anticipation and reaction, each misstep magnified by the humans' unpredictability. They used smoke to obscure movements, mirrors and reflective surfaces to confuse sensors, and improvised barricades to funnel assault units into ambushes. One group hijacked a low-orbit drone, using its optics to track our units while projecting false readings to our command network. The humans were learning faster than any system could adjust, turning our technological superiority into a liability. By the third day, the battle had transformed entirely. What we had assumed would be an unremarkable occupation had become a contest of intellect, adaptability, and moral fortitude. Their sacrifices were both human and tactical. A young soldier, caught under fire, used his body to shield comrades while simultaneously activating an improvised signal that lured enemy units into a trap. Civilians carried the wounded to vantage points where they could continue to contribute, creating a network where every individual, regardless of skill or age, influenced the flow of battle. And then came the crescendo. As night fell, the humans executed a coordinated counterattack that no simulation had predicted.
Explosions erupted along strategic choke points, cutting off supply lines. Hijacked drones descended from the sky, raining fire on our units from above. Civilians and soldiers moved together, a single organism of resistance, advancing through fire and debris with terrifying precision. The desperation that had fueled their defense was now offensive, transformed into a genius of adaptation and surprise. Units that should have crumbled executed clanking maneuvers with near-perfect timing. Barricades that had been defensive became launch points for counterattacks. The city, scarred and burning, became a weapon in their hands. From orbit, we recorded the horror and the beauty of it simultaneously. Navarra, expected to be a monument of conquest, remained unbroken. Its streets, though scarred with rubble and flame, pulsed with life. Humans moved within it not as individuals, but as a collective intelligence, improvising at scales and speeds beyond comprehension. Their unity, fluid and instinctual, seemed evolutionary, a force that combined intellect, courage, and morality into a strategy no algorithm could predict. By dawn, the siege had reached an uneasy stalemate. Our forces had inflicted casualties, yet the city endured. The humans' improvisation had not merely resisted us, they had rewritten the rules of engagement. Every attack, every sacrifice had been leveraged, adapted, and amplified. What began as a test of firepower had become a study in audacity, ingenuity, and resilience. From our observation decks, we began to understand these were not merely survivors. They were innovators of war itself, transforming suffering into advantage, chaos into calculated strategy, vulnerability into weaponry. As the first light of day touched the scarred city, we sensed a deeper terror emerging. Navarra was no longer a city, it was a crucible, shaping a species that could adapt faster than the cosmos itself could account for. And from the human perspective, every burnt street, every ruined building, every fallen comrade was a lesson, a step toward a brilliance that threatened to overturn centuries of expectation. The war we had begun with certainty now teetered on the edge of something unpredictable, unstoppable, and profoundly alien in its logic. Human ingenuity weaponized against every assumption we had ever made. Above the city, the skies smoldered. Below, humans moved among the ruin, unbroken, unbowed, and unafraid. And as we prepared to deploy reinforcements, one truth became undeniable. The siege of Navarra had ended not in conquest, but in revelation. Humanity, a species we had expected to falter, had proven that suffering, desperation, and ingenuity could combine into a force capable of rewriting the rules of war. And in that revelation lay a warning. To underestimate them was to invite annihilation. The ruins of the cities were no longer the center of human resistance. They were the cradle from which it spread.
From orbit, we observed as small bands of humans emerged from shattered streets and crumbling buildings, moving with a purpose that defied all our predictions. Each group was tiny, fragile in our terms, yet capable of devastating effect. They infiltrated our outposts, slipped past sensors that had never failed before, and struck with a precision and audacity that bent probability itself. In one instance, a team of 6 humans penetrated an observation post that should have been impregnable. They bypassed external defenses with improvised tools, reprogrammed a drone to serve as a decoy, and disabled surveillance arrays in a matter of minutes. One human, a young woman with a scar running down her cheek, climbed the side of the structure, using debris as footholds, her movements fluid, deliberate, and terrifyingly efficient. They did not hesitate, they did not falter. Every action was a calculation, yet guided by something more than logic, a force we could not quantify. Every skirmish was a lesson. We recorded them as if they were anomalies, but no dataset could contain the scope of their adaptability. A civilian unit turned collapsed architecture into a launch point for counterattacks. Another group used fire and smoke to cloak their approach while simultaneously manipulating our targeting systems, exploiting weaknesses we did not realize existed. Their improvisation was instinctual, their coordination flawless. They anticipated our movements in ways that suggested not just intellect, but a deeper understanding of their environment and perhaps of our own strategies. And yet, it was more than tactics. Each human acted with a force beyond calculation, empathy intertwined with strategy, instinct fused with moral purpose. One man risked his life to drag a wounded companion through an exposed alley, all the while setting traps that delayed our forces. Another, elderly and frail, directed a small squad with hand gestures and whispers, orchestrating maneuvers that turned vulnerability into tactical advantage. In these acts, we sensed a phenomenon that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Humans did not merely fight, they inspired. Each act of courage radiated through their networks, transforming despair into offensive potency. The humans expanded their war beyond geography into concept. They attacked not merely to survive, but to challenge the constraints of the universe itself, the limits of probability, endurance, and expectation. Across the scorched plains and ruined cities, they moved like an emergent intelligence, a collective force amplified by morality, will, and instinct. Every engagement altered the physics of combat, as if the laws of outcome bent to accommodate their determination. A single strike could ripple into consequences that confounded our simulations. A small sacrifice became a leverage point for a broader tactical advantage. From our perspective, the audacity of it was incomprehensible. These beings, whom we had catalogued as weak, fragile, and inconsequential, had transformed vulnerability into a tool. Their courage was not calculated, it was intrinsic, woven into their very biology, their instincts, their societal structures. Even when outnumbered, outgunned, and exposed, they improvised, adapted, and executed strategies that made our forces falter, retreat, and recalibrate. Their war was kinetic, yes, but it was also existential, a rebellion against limitation itself. We observed, fascinated, and fearful, as humans became architects of chaos and order simultaneously. Infiltrated supply lines were not merely disrupted, they became sources of intelligence. Collapsed terrain was not merely an obstacle, it became a weapon. Each skirmish left our forces more cautious, more uncertain. And yet, even as we recalculated, even as we attempted to predict their movements, the humans evolved faster than we could. What should have been their disadvantage, small numbers, inferior technology, fragile bodies, became a source of creative power. By the time night fell across the contested plains, we realized that humanity had altered the battlefield itself. Their presence was no longer a reaction, it was a force of nature. Their audacity rewrote the rules of engagement, turning chaos into opportunity and desperation into strategy. Even we, observers of countless civilizations, could not anticipate the next step, nor could we fully comprehend the scale of their vision. They fought not merely against us, but against the limitations imposed upon them by biology, circumstance, and probability itself. From orbit, we recorded their movements, their improvisations, their sacrifices, but the recordings felt hollow. No data could capture the full weight of their resolve. Each human act was a ripple in the fabric of war, unpredictable yet coherent, fragile yet unstoppable. And as we watched, a chilling understanding settled across our command networks. We were no longer fighting a species constrained by survival alone. We were confronting a species that weaponized hope, resilience, and ingenuity, the first among countless forces we had underestimated. The call of the void was no longer ours to answer. The humans had made it theirs, and as their small bands disappeared into the darkness of ruined cities, infiltrating, striking, and vanishing, we realized a terrifying truth. The war had expanded beyond borders, beyond prediction, beyond the calculable. Humanity was no longer simply a species in conflict. They had become a phenomenon, a force that challenged the very laws we believed absolute. And in that realization, we understood that the next encounter would not be optional. It would be survival, and perhaps extinction, measured against a will that refused to break. The planet was scarred, its surface a patchwork of ancient cities, ruined fortresses, and desolate wastelands, evidence of centuries of occupation, conquest, and decay.
From orbit, the humans seemed insignificant against the remnants of our previous campaigns. But as we observed closer, it became evidence that they were no longer merely surviving, they were orchestrating a transformation that defied every tactical expectation. Entire landscapes became living defenses, forests were manipulated into mazes of concealment, ruins were repurposed as fortified choke points, rivers and ravines became natural barriers, enhanced with traps and improvised weaponry. Humans moved like a collective organism, each unit, soldier, civilian, or child, functioning as a node in a vast adaptive network. Where we expected chaos, we found coordination. Where we anticipated weakness, we discovered audacity. Each maneuver, each barricade, each decoy was deliberate, executed with a precision that made our simulations obsolete. Ordinary humans became tactical units in ways our analytical models could not predict. A farmer, armed with nothing more than a tool he had carried for decades, redirected an entire squad of our forces into an ambush. A group of children rigged collapsed buildings to collapse further, creating funnels that channeled our units into kill zones. Every human, regardless of age or apparent vulnerability, contributed to a complex ballet of defense and offense, improvising strategies that integrated empathy, intuition, and sheer will. The paradox of humanity revealed itself in every engagement. Their defenses were ruthless yet protective. One human sacrificed herself to save her squad while simultaneously luring an assault team into a trap. Another used the body of a fallen comrade to shield civilians while coordinating an improvised artillery strike. Destruction and preservation danced together in a choreography that transcended tactical logic. Their empathy was a weapon as precise and devastating as any technological marvel we possessed. We, observers of countless civilizations, were forced to acknowledge a terrifying truth. Humans had weaponized something we could not quantify. It was neither technology nor numbers, but the unyielding cohesion of hope, courage, and morale. They adapted to suffering as if it were fuel, turning disadvantage into opportunity, pain into strategy, and fear into audacity. Every setback became a stepping stone, every loss a lesson, and every sacrifice a multiplier of effectiveness. The humans' ingenuity was limitless. In one sector, a group of engineers repurposed alien drone technology, modifying it mid-battle to create surveillance networks that outpaced our own. In another, civilians turned wrecked vehicles into mobile fortresses, using debris as armor and flamethrowers salvaged from broken infrastructure to control key approaches. Even the terrain seemed to bend to their will. Collapsed bridges became assault platforms. Burned-out buildings were transformed into sniper towers.
We recorded these actions with growing disbelief, our calculations unable to keep pace with the fluidity of their tactics. But it was not merely their creativity that stunned us. It was their audacity. Humans struck when we expected hesitation, advanced when retreat seemed inevitable, and seized opportunities that should have been invisible to any rational calculation. Their attacks were unpredictable, improvisational, yet coordinated with an elegance that suggested a deeper intelligence at work. They did not simply respond, they initiated, transformed, and defined the battle itself. From our orbiting observation posts, we began to realize the scale of the revelation. Humans were reshaping not just battles, but the very principles of engagement. Conventional metrics of power, numbers, firepower, technology, were meaningless when confronted with a species that turned morality, will, and cooperation into instruments of war. Each human carried within them the capacity to inspire, to coordinate, and to improvise, creating a force greater than the sum of its parts. The battlefield itself had become a canvas for their ingenuity, and every act of resistance painted a new possibility. At the center of the confrontation, a single moment crystallized this paradoxical power. A squad, trapped between two assault units, appeared doomed. One human, barely conscious, crawled forward to activate a makeshift signal that drew reinforcements from a hidden position. Another, wounded and bleeding, lifted debris to shield civilians while coordinating flanking attacks. Simultaneously, a child emerged from the wreckage with a small incendiary device, igniting a barricade that redirected enemy forces into prepared kill zones. In less than minutes, the near-certain defeat of this unit had been converted into a decisive tactical advantage. From our sensors, it was a miracle. From our analysis, it was a lesson in audacity, adaptability, and the irreducible force of the human spirit. We cataloged the destruction, the improvisation, the strategy, but still comprehension lagged behind observation. Humans did not fight merely to survive. They fought to protect, to create, to transcend the circumstances imposed upon them. Each act of empathy became a weapon. Each act of courage became a force multiplier. Every setback was transformed into momentum. And as the confrontation reached its apex, we realized that the human's true power was neither technological nor numerical. It was intrinsic, unquantifiable, and terrifyingly effective. The battle ended not with surrender or annihilation, but with revelation. The humans had broken the chains imposed upon them by centuries of occupation, turning oppression into opportunity, devastation into ingenuity, and vulnerability into weaponized resilience. Entire landscapes had been reshaped, entire strategies rewritten, and entire perceptions of warfare shattered. We understood, finally, that this species' audacity, ingenuity, and unbreakable spirit were forces that could not be predicted, constrained, or contained. And as we withdrew to reassess, the humans remained, standing amidst the scars of battle, unbowed, unbroken, and unafraid. The chains of oppression had been shattered, but the war had only deepened. Their eyes, glowing with determination, told a story we could not ignore. The humans did not merely survive, they commanded the battlefield, shaped its rules, and weaponized hope itself. And in that command, we sensed the terrifying truth. The galaxy had not encountered mere survivors. It had encountered architects of defiance,
whose ingenuity would echo across worlds for generations to come. By the culmination of the war, the humans had transcended all expectations. What had begun as resistance in isolated cities and ruined landscapes had become a galaxy-wide phenomenon. From orbit and distant observation posts, we watched as humans reshaped the battlefield itself, converting every terrain, desolate plains, crumbling metropolises, even frozen wastelands, into instruments of strategy. Their actions confounded the logic of our most advanced generals, disrupted the predictions of our simulations, and rendered our doctrine of dominance meaningless. Entire colonies, once thought impregnable, surrendered not to superior firepower or technological might, but to the intangible force of human determination. Even those species who had never known fear now recoiled at the sight of human coordination. They moved as one organism, yet retained the individuality that allowed for improvisation and audacity. A single human could turn the tide of a skirmish, but hundreds, thousands, operating with instinctive cohesion became an unstoppable current. Every assault we launched, every occupation we attempted, was met with ingenuity that adapted faster than our systems could calculate. From the skies, the humans' unity was almost hypnotic. Cities were not merely defended, they were transformed. Skyscrapers became vertical strongholds, streets became tactical networks. Every civilian, soldier, and strategist contributed to an adaptive, living system of offense and defense. Drones intended to surveil were intercepted, repurposed, and used against us. Tactical ambushes exploited even the smallest environmental cues, turning rubble, fire, and smoke into weapons. What should have been chaos became ballet, simultaneously brutal and precise, coordinated yet flexible, destructive yet protective. Even in the face of devastation, humans rose again. Entire settlements reduced to rubble became launch points for counterattacks. Families, soldiers, and civilians acted not out of command, but out of mutual understanding, empathy, and shared purpose.
A colony that had suffered repeated bombardment improvised new defensive formations overnight, using debris, salvage technology, and environmental hazards to funnel our assault units into traps. Each adaptation was faster than the last, and each success fed into the next iteration, creating a feedback loop of creativity and resilience. From our vantage, the HFY truth became undeniable. These beings were not merely surviving, they were elevating the principles of warfare to something we could barely comprehend. Their strategies were unpredictable because they were guided not solely by intellect, but by morality, courage, and unity. They inspired one another, turning fear into determination and suffering into strategic advantage. We recorded metrics, patterns, and outcomes, but the true force behind human victory eluded quantification. It was something we had cataloged in theory, but never observed in practice. Hope weaponized, will intensified, and the unbreakable drive of a species refusing to bow to extinction. In one decisive engagement, we witnessed the apex of their evolution. A combined human fleet and planetary resistance executed maneuvers that synchronized orbital strikes, ground assaults, and defensive countermeasures with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Individual units, acting independently yet as part of a larger whole, exploited weaknesses in our formations we did not know existed. Entire divisions of our forces were rerouted, neutralized, or captured, not through overwhelming force, but through ingenuity, anticipation, and the audacity of will. Even after suffering catastrophic losses, humans rose, adapted, and countered, using every setback as a learning mechanism. They did not rely on technology alone, though they wielded it expertly. They relied on intellect, empathy, courage, and unity, their survival encoded in adaptability and cooperation. Entire worlds, scarred by war, bore witness to the audacity of this species as humans turned devastation into opportunity and created leverage where none should have existed. From our alien perspective, the final revelation was clear. Humans were not defined by their tools, their weapons, or even their numbers. They were defined by the combination of intellect, morality, and unite. They were capable of reshaping the battlefield and the galaxy itself simply by refusing to break. And as the last assaults concluded, with the survivors standing among ruins, fires, and shattered skies, we understood the essence of their power, the indomitable, unquantifiable human spirit, rising relentlessly, a force that could not be simulated, contained, or defeated. And in that moment, we, observers of countless civilizations across millennia, knew the truth. The humans had ascended, not merely to victory, but to legend. Their presence altered the balance of strategy, warfare, and expectation across the galaxy.
To fight them was no longer a matter of tactics. It was a confrontation with a force beyond comprehension, a species whose very existence defied prediction, whose survival depended on unity, intellect, and the audacity to refuse defeat. The galaxy had been introduced to a new paradigm, the human ascendant. And from our observation, all we could do was watch, awed, fearful, and humbled, as the beings we once dismissed as weak became the arbiters of destiny itself. As the dust settled across scarred worlds, we cataloged not only the tangible results of human resistance, the cities that endured, the outposts reclaimed, the forces routed, but also the intangible legacy that no sensor, no calculation, no simulation could quantify. It was the legacy of their spirit, the echo of audacity and willpower that defied every expectation. From the orbiting observation platforms, we traced the ripple of their influence, and with each passing system, it became clear humanity's mark on the galaxy was not merely physical, it was ideological, cultural, and existential. Systems once deemed impregnable had been transformed. Fortresses we had counted on as bastions of power now bore the fingerprints of human ingenuity. Entire planets had been reshaped, terrain and infrastructure adapted in real time to human strategy. And yet it was not brute force that achieved these transformations. It was intellect, creativity, and the collective will of a species united not just by survival, but by purpose. Every act of resistance, every improvisation under fire, became a blueprint for a new kind of warfare, one where audacity and empathy were as potent as artillery and plasma cannons. Across the galaxy, allies and enemies alike were forced to recognize a paradigm shift. Where we had expected compliance, we found defiance. Where we had assumed fear, we found courage. Where we had relied on technology to dictate the terms of conflict, we discovered that humanity relied on something far more devastating: each other. Their unity, their empathy, their resilience were weapons beyond measure. A mother shielding her child in a crumbling city, a squad improvising from debris and fire, a scientist turning salvage into tactical advantage. These were the acts that defined victory. These were the acts that redefined the rules of engagement, and they left impressions far more lasting than any battlefield conquest. And yet, humans did not simply endure, they inspired. We observed the ripple effects of their victories. Neighboring species began to reconsider their own strategies. Allies found hope in their courage. And even adversaries hesitated before imposing destruction, wary of a species that seemed to convert suffering into strategy and defiance into doctrine. Humanity's influence spread not as a wave of dominance, but as a radiance of possibility.
To witness it was to understand that survival alone was not the measure of greatness. The measure was in the ability to rise, adapt, and inspire across impossibilities. From our alien vantage, the lesson crystallized. Power was not in annihilation. Power was not in fear, numbers, or technology. It was in the audacity to endure, the intelligence to adapt, and the courage to act, even when the odds were impossible. Humans embodied this principle at every scale, individual heroism and collective ingenuity intertwined, creating a force both visible and intangible. Their victories were not fleeting, they were encoded into the very understanding of what a species could achieve when driven by empathy, unity, and unbreakable will. We observed the final battles, the surrender of colonies, and the reclamation of planets with an understanding tinged with awe and apprehension. The galaxy had underestimated them, and that miscalculation would echo across generations. Systems once considered secure now bore evidence that even the mightiest could be challenged by resolve alone. Entire civilizations would recount the human example for centuries, how a species, fragile by physiology, small in number, and limited by technology, could rise against overwhelming odds and force the universe to bend to their audacity. The human story became a warning, a lesson, and an inspiration simultaneously. A warning to those who might presume weakness in appearances, a lesson to those who had relied solely on brute force, an inspiration to those who still faced impossible odds, proving that ingenuity, morality, and courage were as vital to survival and victory as any weapon. We cataloged the events meticulously, Yet the data, the charts, and the simulations could never capture the essence, the fire within the humans that refused to be extinguished. And as we withdrew from orbiting observation, leaving behind the world scarred by conflict, but alive with human presence, the truth settled over our intelligence networks like a shadow and a light intertwined. Humanity had endured, humanity had adapted, humanity had inspired. And in doing so, they had proven a simple, terrifying truth. The measure of power is not destruction alone, but the unyielding courage to rise from ashes again and again, shaping the cosmos not through domination, but through the indomitable spirit of those who refuse to break. The legacy of the fire was written across stars, cities, and hearts alike. And as we cataloged it, the galaxy could not deny what we had seen. Humans were not merely survivors. They were architects of defiance, arbiters of hope, and a species whose spirit would echo long after every battlefield had fallen silent. In them, we witnessed the ultimate HFY revelation, that life, when guided by intellect, empathy, and unshakable unity, could bend even the cosmos to its will.